Welcome to another episode of Discover You, our podcast exploring innovative and effective solutions to issues in mental and behavioral health. I'm JD Kalmenson, CEO of Montier Behavioral Health, a family of dynamic treatment centers across Southern California. We're here at the Emerging Themes Conference, catching up with some of the amazing guests and innovators who are reshaping the treatment space with fresh breakthroughs and new approaches. Today, I'm so happy to be able to have a conversation with one of our speakers, Shari Foos, a marriage and family therapist licensed in California, New York. She earned an MS in narrative medicine from Columbia University and a master's in clinical psychology from Antioch University in Los Angeles, where she is an adjunct professor. Thank you so much for being here. Narrative therapy and narrative method is not the same thing.
Correct.
Maybe you can tell us and our listeners a little bit about, first and foremost, narrative therapy, and then tell us a little bit about the method that you've created, and we can take it from there.
So narrative therapy is a modality of psychotherapy that was started in Australia, I believe in the 90s, by Michael White and David Epson. And the purpose of narrative therapy is to sort of break out of the traditional boundaries in which the client and the therapist meet in the therapist's office. In this case, they may meet at a coffee shop or at a park. So you're starting to disempower the hierarchy. And through conversations, the therapist encourages the client to rethink their story in their own terms, and also with the impact of what you've learned as an adult. So if we come to some conclusion as a young child, we're not carrying that forward. We can upgrade it with what we learn.
Interesting. So there are two things, two details, but maybe you're saying that they're both expressions of the same underlying philosophy of narrative therapy. The two details were one, it's not administered in the typical therapeutic environment of the couch, the office, therapist's office. It's in a sort of neutral setting where there isn't such a imbalance of power, as it were. It's more conversational and more informal. That might help the client lower their guard and engage in a more casual type of conversation, be more open. And then the second was the actual content of the conversation. It won't be framed, or the engagement or the line of questioning might sound differently than therapists would have with their client in the office.
Absolutely, yes.
So what would be an example of a conversation we were to have if you were engaging in narrative therapy with me as the client? We're sitting in a park. How would it look like?
We're sitting in a park, and you tell me, you know, I've just never really been good at getting my work in on time. I'm such a procrastinator. Well, that is not only a common struggle, but something that it doesn't really have a wide influence to draw from to understand what's true or there. So one reason people may procrastinate is because they're afraid of failing. Another reason may be attention deficit. But whatever those reasons are, once you come to terms with what actually has happened to you, you no longer have to call yourself a procrastinator. You have a greater depth of appreciation for what took place that caused you to respond in a certain way. So now you may say, in the past, I struggled with procrastination. Another thing in narrative therapy is you are not depressed, you have depression.
Interesting. So there's an attempt, and hopefully more than an attempt, to externalize the symptoms and not allow it to become a part of how we're self-identifying.
Exactly.
So we're taking whatever the struggle is, and we're saying that it's not my narrative?
Well, I can't say that for you, but I'm inviting you to think about these ideas about your being a procrastinator in a different way. So first of all, when you walk around as a procrastinator, you're pretty limited. You're likely to continue procrastinating.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Just recently read about a patient who was undergoing, he was from a foreign country, he was in the States, he was actually in LA, he had I think his appendix burst, so he had to go to the hospital, even though he's not a citizen of this country and he doesn't speak English. So the nurses didn't have a proper chance to prep him for what exactly is going to be happening. He's visited by his family members, and the nurse says that he just finished surgery, and he's going to need a couple of days of bed rest. He probably won't be able to even talk to you or get out of bed. And they walk into the room, and he literally just finished surgery a couple minutes prior, and he gets up, and she's shocked, and without struggling, he walks around, washes his hands like he was going about his business. And the nurse says, this is either a miracle or maybe because we never told him that he wouldn't be able to do any of these activities. He didn't know to expect to be bedridden, almost, right? So
that's a great example.
He wasn't seeing himself with those built-in embedded limitations. Okay, so that's a little bit about narrative therapy. Let's talk about the method that you developed called the narrative method.
Yes.
And maybe first and foremost, tell us what it is, and then we could talk about when did you come up with it and what experiences led you to that.
The narrative method is a group experience that uses your creativity and stories as a way to connect more deeply with yourself and with other people. And we do that by putting aside our judgment of ourselves, our criticism of others, and instead we allow ourselves to be like toddlers in a sandbox. I'm going to give you a prompt. You write for 7 minutes. Go anywhere. When we don't try and control it, and certainly this is not an assignment with an agenda, so you can let go of that stuff. When we don't try and control ourselves and let our imaginations take over, we will be amazed by what we thought.
Fascinating. So why does it have to be done in a group?
The group experience is really a way to normalize all of these feelings that everyone has in our culture right now. If you're not anxious or depressed, there's probably something wrong with you. So when, let's use the example of procrastinating. Maybe someone in one of my groups will just say, well, you know, I'd like to write, but I'm such a procrastinator. And we will stop them and say, are you sure that's true? What else is true here? And to invite people to think of themselves outside the ordinary box that was initially interjected into them, but then they take over. We all take over. We've heard these negative comments in our lives as children, and we continue doing that until we change the page.
Fascinating. So there's a couple of things that are happening here. First of all, we want you to, actually similar to narrative therapy, we want you to leave your self-imposed limitations and restrictions and inhibitions. So in that sense, it's like narrative therapy. We want to extricate you from this narrative, from this sort of box that you've created or that the people around you and society has created. We want you to do it in a group because that energy might help you become more engaged and release the inhibitions. But we also want you to foster your creativity in a completely natural, flowing way without any sort of external markers, boundaries. It almost is deeply subliminal, you know, in that sense, because sometimes, right, we don't allow our subconscious to be expressed, but when you're just going in that free flow motion,
there it goes.
Right? Freudian. It's like it all comes out, what's on your mind and what's really on your heart. And so it's like creative writing or art. Is it specific? It could be any task. It doesn't have to be anything specifically.
Well, it would be a creative expression.
Creative expression.
So we may look at a video and talk about that. We may do sensory experiences. We just did something in a breakout with blindfolds, and people talk to each other and have the experience of their own voice. If you close your eyes and you're in that vast blackness and you realize no one can see you, your face starts to relax and you realize all of these ways my muscles tense up for social purposes.
Wow. Wow. But going back to just the technical detail, the type of activity or assignment in the group, it's creative expression, but it's not limited to any specific type of creative expression.
What we do online is all creative writing. That's
all
a
creative writing.
1-hour experience. People come from all over the country and beyond. Diverse,
Wow.
different backgrounds, different levels of writing experience.
And it's online.
Yes, it's online.
So how do you feel the presence of other people? Everybody's writing at the same time? Or they're sharing their writing?
Both, yes.
Both.
So people write to prompts. They then go into small breakouts. Everyone reads what they've written.
Wow.
There is no feedback. It's just witnessing. And when you witness, you realize the power of your own goodness, to just be present for someone. What a gift to allow them to feel seen and heard.
Wow.
And then when it's your turn, you get that too.
Very interesting. And overall, the outcomes, the sort of, takeaways, are people looking at their creative writing and thinking to themselves, wow, I have a deeper insight into my struggles, my triumphs, my challenges, my successes. Is that what people are wanting? Maybe, but not necessarily.
The prompts are generally, the written prompts are generally a story, meant to evoke a story. You can write in any form, poetry, prose, what have you. So in those stories, sometimes people consciously or unconsciously project themselves. They always project what they think.
Got it.
But then when we go into breakouts in pairs, they're given a verbal prompt based on the written prompt and invited to share with each other whatever comes up.
Interesting. And analyze it.
Not analyze
Not
it.
analyze.
Just share. Just listen and get that experience of hearing your own voice because you're not interrupted, and taking in someone else with your love.
Wow. So it's a therapeutic activity in and of itself, without the agenda of alleviating other symptoms or dealing with some type of a diagnosis.
Exactly.
That is really different and special.
Exactly. It's all about the connection.
Right.
And it's like if you're in a very sad place and someone persuades you to go out to a party and you have a good time, why are you better?
Yeah.
You're better.
I love the underlying message, which is I'm using a part of myself that I'm not usually in contact with. I'm using other people to help me get to that part of myself.
And I'm using myself
to help
other people.
Go
deep as well.
Very interesting. So it really only works in a group setting, based on what I'm hearing. Like if it's done individually, wouldn't have the same potency.
No, I mean, we have created some card decks where people can use them for writing prompts, or you could get together family or friends and do them. So to that extent, you can do it on your own. But what's really powerful is towards the end, when people share what their experience was like today, they inevitably, whether they cry or laugh, they're felt. And if someone says, I'm a procrastinator, they see maybe 50 heads nodding, like, me too.
Wow.
And you can't deny, when you're not the only one, that it can't be this flaw of yours, like you're the owner of this flaw. You start to realize this is humanity in this time and place.
Wow. Do people ever write things that when they look at it after they've written it, they are disturbed?
I'm sure that's possible.
Lowering your guard down can expose some things that you'd rather not see. But at the end of the day, it's like the fellow who says he read about the dangers of drinking and it scared the wits out of him. So he decided from then on, no more reading, right? So we can't really, just ignorance isn't all that blissful. But tell me a little bit about how it came about.
I had been a writer and a performer for many years before I became a therapist, and I always loved working with groups. I'm generally funny, and I like to disarm people and help them have a good time. And the more you disarm people by making them laugh, by making them feel safe, and by loving them, really. Each time I just say to myself before I start, love each person every time. That's my goal. Wow. When you love people, they loosen up. So when you talk to them like you're hanging with your close friends, they respond in kind. People are so hungry for that kind of depth connection even with a stranger. And it tells us so much about our capacity when we realize we can instantly go
Sometimes
deep
even
with-
more with a stranger,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
I'm sure you see
yes.
that. So you took your previous career and you melded it into your current therapeutic
Exactly.
career.
Well,
I love that.
As a therapist, I loved working with groups as well. And then 15 years ago, my family and I moved to New York on a whim because life is short. And it was then that I did the master's in narrative medicine at Columbia. And it was so rooted in social justice. And there was so much to learn about the science of connection. And I had done salons even as a performer where people would be gathered together and share their creativity and ideas. So I didn't even know exactly what it would be, but I started doing these salons. And they were all live until the pandemic. And now I just love the power of doing it online where you can get so many different people.
Wow. It's a global audience.
It is, yes.
Does it have the same energy
As what?
as in person?
That is what has blown my mind. When you are on a Zoom, I can't speak to people who have to be on, a work Zoom for 8 hours. But you're on a Zoom like this and you're engaged because you're doing things. You look at the screen, nobody's on their phone, nobody's doing other things like they do in life.
Right.
So
Interesting.
here's this engagement with all of these eyes. And you realize that what you would see on an fMRI machine in person, which is if one person is talking and the others are listening, all those brains are lit in the same place. You have that powerful eye contact connection. So it's really a marvelous thing. And who would have known? Am I glad for the pandemic? Maybe just for that little piece.
Wow. That is so interesting. And would you say that folks who utilize narrative method, do you think that it increases the quality of their relationships? They feel
I do.
more empowered to connect with people?
Yes. It's built on 12 core concepts. Each concept is both a tool and a philosophy. And all of them are supposed to protect you and keep you awake from the impact of what I call the cult of culture, the constant onslaught that all of us have received. And it obviously accelerates, but from the first time you're put in front of a television, you start to learn what's wrong with you. By the time you're in elementary school, you know very specifically what's wrong with you.
Wow.
And so to even put a dent in that unlearning is to have different kinds of experiences, positive experiences of your voice, of your creativity, of connecting with other people, until there is something to sort of refute the old expectation.
That is so interesting. And it also resonates a lot. I remember when I was in college, I'd be studying late at night, and after my third coffee, I'd be so tired. Then all of a sudden, somebody would walk in the room, and we would talk for maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, and I would be awake. It was like a new breath of, like, fresh air, a lease on my night as it was extended. And it's palpable.
Yeah.
It's just the way we're wired.
Yes.
But I love how you're combining this part of our humanity, our social cravings, or the social capital, as it were, with the unfiltered, with the unrestricted, uninhibited part of ourselves, and how they come together.
And you get rewarded for being forthcoming. So many times we're afraid to look at something because it's painful, or we just fear that if we just unpack it, we will fall apart. But it's almost always a liberation. And it's less when it's outside and you can look at it for what it is than when you're up to here with it.
Wow. Where would you like to see this in 5, 10 years?
Well, one goal, we train facilitators and are adding more salons, but I think it would be amazing to have one every hour of every day somewhere in the world.
Wow.
Where you could tune in, you just go online and join this group, and it would have instant translation. So every day we would know that at least somebody was not jumping off their ledge.
Wow. How many are there currently? How many salons?
Well, right now we're doing 3. We're about to add 5 more. We've got about 30,000 people in our community and growing.
Wow.
Yeah. They don't come to, each of them don't come to every single salon.
Got it. Yeah.
That would be big.
Yeah. But possible because it's online.
Exactly.
And you have breakout rooms, I'm sure. How big is the
Exactly.
breakout room?
Well, it depends which exercise. So after people write, they go into breakouts of 4. Everyone reads,
go.
nobody
Wow.
comments, and then they have a conversation. Then there's a breakout for what we call the mosaic. Everyone reads one line in rapid fire, creating yet another story, which appears on our community Facebook page.
Wow.
And then they go into pairs in breakouts, sharing something personal.
Very interesting. So this is kind of a abridged version of behavioral health and wellness together.
Yes, and you can be a lay person.
You can be a layperson.
You don't need a license to use your humanity.
Wow, that's beautiful. And you also don't need a diagnosis to be a part of this.
Exactly. And you don't need a diagnosis to get better.
Right.
And you don't need a diagnosis to find out what's wrong with you. What's
That's
wrong
right.
with you? Everything. We've all got
Everything
it.
and nothing.
Exactly.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing this. This is really
thank you.
beautiful. And I hope that everyone listening here would be able to check this out. Where can they find more about your beautiful work?
Thank you.
Where can they find?
It is thenarrativemethod.org
Okay.
/events. And you can sign up for as many as you like. They're all free, but each one has its own link. So please come.
Wow. Very special. It's truly been a pleasure having you with us today. And we want to thank Shari with a heartfelt thank you for joining us on the Discover You podcast. And most of all, we want to thank you, the listeners and the viewers of this program. It's an honor and a treat to be able to bring cutting edge behavioral health, new modalities, so that you can know what's out there and enrich your life.